In October 2014, GoPro was the hottest tech stock on Wall Street, worth an astounding $11 billion. Founder Nick Woodman became surfing's first billionaire with a net worth of $2.5 billion. The company's tiny cameras were everywhere, strapped to skydivers, mounted on Formula One race cars, attached to surfboards, even sent to the edge of space on weather balloons. GoPro wasn't just selling cameras, they were selling a lifestyle that made everyone feel like an extreme athlete. Their YouTube channel had more subscribers than Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour combined. Today we're going to uncover the economic story of how the coolest camera company in the world went from being worth more than Xerox, Ralph Lauren, and Harley Davidson to barely surviving bankruptcy. And more importantly, what this spectacular rise and fall teaches us about market hype, valuation bubbles, and why even the most innovative products can't save a company from fundamental business mistakes. If you want to understand the economic stories that shaped our world while most people weren't paying attention, please hit that like button and subscribe to The Sleeping Economist. Ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the financial mysteries that most people slept through. Chapter 1. The Perfect Wave. Nick Woodman's story began in 2002 with a spectacular failure. His first company, a gaming website called Funbug, burned through $4 million of investor money in just 2 years before shutting down. At 26 years old, Woodman was devastated. He took a 5-month surfing trip to Australia and Indonesia to clear his head, and it was on this trip that he became obsessed with a simple problem. How could surfers capture their own photos while riding waves? Back in California, desperate for redemption, and armed with his mom's sewing machine and a $35,000 loan from his parents, Woodman started working 18-hour days in his parents' house. He initially created wrist straps for disposable cameras that surfers could use while riding waves. He sold these straps out of his 1971 Volkswagen van at surf competitions, making about $150 on a good day. But he quickly realized the real opportunity wasn't the strap. It was creating a better camera specifically designed for action sports. By 2004, GoPro sold its first camera, a 35mm film camera attached to a wrist strap for $20. Woodman was still the only employee, handling everything from product development to shipping orders from his childhood bedroom. But the real breakthrough came in 2006 with their first digital camera, which could shoot 10-second video clips. Here's what made GoPro fundamentally different. While Sony and Canon were fighting over who could make the highest quality traditional camera with the most megapixels, GoPro asked a completely different question. What if the camera could go anywhere and survive anything? The timing was absolutely perfect. YouTube had just launched in 2005, and suddenly everyone wanted to share videos online. Facebook was opening to the public in 2006. Social media was exploding, and GoPro cameras produced content that was inherently shareable, first-person footage of people doing incredible things that looked impossible. A video of someone skiing off a cliff shot from their helmet would get millions of views overnight. The company's revenue grew from $350,000 in 2005 to $234 million by 2011. That's not just growth, that's a 668-fold increase in 6 years. By 2012, GoPro owned 45% of the entire action camera market, selling cameras in over 100 countries. They weren't just selling hardware at this point. They were building an entire ecosystem. The GoPro app let users edit and share videos instantly. Professional athletes were getting million-dollar sponsorship deals based solely on their GoPro footage. Red Bull was using GoPro cameras exclusively for their extreme sports events, creating a symbiotic relationship that promoted both brands. This brings us to the crucial moment that would define GoPro's future, June 26, 2014. GoPro went public at $24 per share, raising $427 million in one of the most anticipated IPOs of the year. On the first day of trading, the stock shot up to $31, valuing the company at $3.9 billion. Within 4 months, it would nearly triple, creating and destroying fortunes in the process. Chapter 2. Riding the Hype Machine. But here's where it gets interesting. Between June and October 2014, GoPro's stock price rocketed from $24 to an astounding $87, pushing the company's valuation past $11 billion. To put that in perspective, GoPro was now worth more than established American companies like Xerox, Ralph Lauren, Harley Davidson, or even the New York Times Company. A company that made small cameras was valued higher than companies that had been American institutions for generations. Wall Street analysts were falling over themselves to praise the company. JP Morgan set a price target of $100, calling GoPro the next Apple. Goldman Sachs compared it to Nike, saying GoPro was building not just a product but a lifestyle brand that would define a generation. One analyst actually wrote that GoPro could become the most important media company of the 21st century. The media coverage was relentless and uniformly positive. Every extreme sports video that went viral seemed to feature GoPro footage, from Felix Baumgartner's space jump to countless shark encounters. The numbers looked absolutely incredible on the surface. In 2014, GoPro's revenue hit $1.4 billion, up from $986 million the previous year. They sold 5.2 million cameras, with their Hero 3 Plus Black Edition becoming the best-selling camera on Amazon, beating every Canon and Nikon model. The company had grown to 700 employees and was opening offices in Munich, Tokyo, and Shanghai. Their marketing was genius. Instead of paying for advertisements, they simply reposted user content, getting free advertising from their own customers. But underneath these impressive numbers, serious warning signs were already emerging that most investors ignored. GoPro's growth rate was actually slowing significantly, from 87% in 2013 to 42% in 2014. The action camera market, which seemed limitless in 2012, was starting to show clear signs of saturation. The truth was simple but uncomfortable. How many people actually needed a camera that could survive being dropped from a plane or submerged 200 feet underwater? More concerning was GoPro's fundamental business model. They made money by selling hardware, physical cameras. But hardware is an incredibly tough business. You need to constantly innovate to avoid becoming obsolete, manage complex global supply chains, deal with inventory risk, and face brutal competition from Chinese manufacturers who could copy your product and sell it for half the price. Unlike software companies that can sell the same product millions of times with virtually no additional cost, every GoPro camera required materials, manufacturing, shipping, and retail partnerships. The company tried to address this weakness by moving into media and software. In 2015, they launched GoPro Entertainment, planning to become a media company that would license user-generated content to advertisers and TV networks. They hired executives from Netflix and Google. They imagined the GoPro channel becoming like ESPN for action sports, generating hundreds of millions in licensing fees. But this transformation would require skills, relationships, and infrastructure that a hardware company didn't naturally possess. Chapter 3. The Karma Disaster. The real breaking point came with a product called Karma, GoPro's ambitious entry into the drone market. In 2015, drones were being hailed as the next revolutionary consumer technology. DJI, a Chinese company founded in a Hong Kong dorm room, was dominating the market with 70% market share. GoPro executives thought they could leverage their camera expertise and brand loyalty to build a better drone. After all, most people bought drones to take aerial footage, and nobody knew cameras better than GoPro, right? The Karma drone was announced with great fanfare in May 2015 for release that Christmas. Woodman personally promised it would be the most versatile camera ever created. But development problems pushed the launch back again and again. The engineering challenges were immense. Creating a flying robot that could carry a camera, maintain stability in wind, avoid obstacles, and be simple enough for consumers to operate. Meanwhile, DJI released their Phantom 3 and then the revolutionary Mavic Pro, which was smaller, had better features, longer flight time, and superior image stabilization than what GoPro was planning. When Karma finally launched in October 2016, a full 16 months late, it was priced at $799 or $1,099 bundled with a camera. For exactly 16 days, everything seemed fine. Early reviews were positive, praising the drone's compact design and integrated camera. GoPro stock jumped 7% on launch day. Orders were pouring in. Then absolute disaster struck. On November 8, 2016, GoPro announced they were recalling all 2,500 Karma drones sold because some units were losing power mid-flight and literally falling from the sky. Imagine spending $800 on a drone only to watch it plummet from 400 feet and smash into pieces, potentially injuring someone below. Videos of Karma drones crashing went viral, becoming a public relations nightmare. The recall wasn't just financially devastating. It destroyed GoPro's reputation for quality and reliability. The Karma relaunch in February 2017 was dead on arrival. By then, DJI's Mavic Pro had completely captured the market. GoPro's drone had inferior battery life, 20 minutes versus 27, shorter range, 3 miles versus 4.3, and lacked crucial features like obstacle avoidance that DJI included. In January 2018, after less than 2 years and losses estimated at over $100 million, GoPro exited the drone market entirely, laying off 300 employees and taking massive write-downs on inventory. But Karma was just one symptom of a much bigger problem. GoPro's core camera business was also collapsing. Smartphone cameras were improving at an extraordinary rate. The iPhone 7 released in 2016 was waterproof and could shoot 4K video. Samsung's Galaxy S7 could shoot slow-motion footage. Why would average consumers buy a separate $400 camera when their phone, which they already carried everywhere, could do almost the same thing? Chapter 4. The Unraveling. The financial fallout was swift, brutal, and shocking to Wall Street. GoPro's stock, which peaked at $87 in October 2014, fell to $60 by the end of 2015, then crashed to $10 by the end of 2016. Revenue in 2016 dropped to $1.2 billion, down from $1.6 billion the previous year. The company posted a staggering loss of $419 million. In just 2 years, over $10 billion in market value had evaporated. Here's what was actually happening behind the scenes. GoPro had built its entire business model on the assumption that everyone would eventually want an action camera. Their internal projections, which they shared with investors, showed the market growing from 5 million units in 2014 to 20 million by 2020. They believed action cameras would become as common as smartphones. Instead, the market peaked at around 7 million units in 2015 and then started shrinking rapidly. The total addressable market was a fraction of what they'd assumed. The company was stuck with massive amounts of unsold inventory. In 2016 alone, they had to write off $57 million worth of cameras that nobody wanted to buy. Major retailers like Best Buy, Target, and Walmart were sending products back and demanding refunds. GoPro had to offer desperate discounts just to clear inventory, 50% off sales that destroyed their profit margins and trained consumers to never pay full price. The Hero 5 Black, which launched at $399, was being sold for $199 within months. The layoffs started in January 2016. 100 employees, about 7% of the workforce. Another 270 were let go in November 2016. Then 300 more in January 2018 when they shut down the drone division. The company that once employed 1,500 people with ambitious plans to reach 5,000 shrank to under 1,000. Entire departments were eliminated. The entertainment division, the drone team, most of the marketing department, all gone. Nick Woodman, the billionaire founder, watched his paper net worth evaporate. His stake in GoPro, once worth $2.5 billion at the peak, fell to less than $200 million. He had to sell his $30 million mansion. But regular investors suffered even more. Anyone who bought GoPro stock at its peak lost 98% of their investment. Mutual funds and pension funds that had invested hundreds of millions saw those investments nearly wiped out. Retail investors who believed the hype about the next Apple lost their savings. The company tried increasingly desperate measures to find a buyer. They hired investment bank JP Morgan to explore a sale, but no buyers emerged at any price GoPro would accept. Chinese electronics maker Xiaomi was interested, but only at a price that would have valued GoPro at less than $1 billion, a 90% discount from its peak. Chapter 5. The Struggle for Survival. The aftermath forced GoPro to completely restructure and essentially rebuild from scratch. In 2017, they made a crucial strategic decision. Stop trying to be a media company. Stop trying to be a drone company. Stop trying to be the next Apple and focus solely on making the best action cameras for the small but dedicated group of people who actually needed them. GoPro Entertainment was unceremoniously shut down, with all its grand ambitions abandoned. The company pulled back from trying to create original content and focused on making their cameras better and cheaper. They streamlined their product line from dozens of confusing models to just 3 clear options: good, better, best. They stopped trying to compete in markets they didn't understand. Most importantly, they shifted their business model in a fundamental way. Instead of relying entirely on hardware sales, they launched GoPro Plus, a subscription service priced at $5 per month that offered unlimited cloud storage, damaged camera replacement, and discounts on accessories. This gave them something they'd never had before: recurring revenue that came in every month whether they sold new cameras or not. By 2020, they had over 700,000 subscribers, generating $35 million in annual recurring revenue. The regulatory response to GoPro's collapse was minimal because it didn't threaten the broader financial system like a bank failure would, but it did prompt important discussions about tech valuations and the responsibility of analysts. The Securities and Exchange Commission increased scrutiny on how tech companies report user metrics and growth projections, partly inspired by cases like GoPro, where projections proved wildly and dangerously optimistic. The action camera industry consolidated dramatically in the wake of GoPro's near collapse. Dozens of competitors that had emerged during GoPro's boom years went bankrupt. Contour, Ion, Drift, and others all disappeared. Sony exited the action camera market in 2020. Garmin scaled back their ambitions. By 2021, it was essentially just GoPro and DJI left standing, plus some low-cost Chinese manufacturers selling knockoffs on Amazon. Remarkably, GoPro did manage to stabilize, though at a much smaller and more realistic size. By focusing on their core customers, actual extreme sports enthusiasts rather than casual users who might use a camera once, they found a sustainable niche. Revenue stabilized around $1 billion annually. The stock, while never recovering to its absurd peaks, climbed back from its $3 low to hover between $5 and $10, where it remains today. Chapter 6. The Lesson of False Summits. So what can regular people learn from GoPro's spectacular rise and catastrophic fall? First, beware of total addressable market fallacies. GoPro assumed everyone who liked watching extreme sports videos would buy an action camera. That's like assuming everyone who watches cooking shows will buy professional chef equipment. The market for people who actually do extreme sports regularly enough to justify a $400 camera was always limited, probably just a few million people worldwide. When Wall Street valued GoPro at $11 billion, they were essentially betting that every active person on Earth would eventually own one. Second, hardware is hard, and switching from hardware to software or media is even harder. GoPro tried to become a media company because they correctly saw that software and content have better profit margins than physical products. But building cameras requires completely different skills than running a media platform. Different talent, different relationships, different infrastructure. Third, watch out for the smartphone effect. Smartphones have killed dozens of previously successful products. Digital cameras, GPS devices, portable music players, handheld gaming devices, calculators, flashlights, and more. Any single-purpose device needs to be dramatically better than what a smartphone can do, or it's vulnerable. Fourth, stock price isn't company value. When GoPro hit $87 per share, the market was pricing in years of perfect execution and massive growth. But stock markets often overshoot dramatically in both directions. The same company that was worth $11 billion in 2014 and $300 million in 2018 was essentially the same business selling similar products to similar customers. What changed was perception and hype, not fundamental value. For investors today, GoPro's story is a critical warning about buying into hype. When everyone is talking about a hot stock, when analysts are making uniformly aggressive predictions, when the media coverage is entirely positive, when your Uber driver is giving you stock tips, that's often the worst possible time to buy. The best investments are usually boring companies solving real problems with sustainable business models, not exciting companies promising to revolutionize the world. If stories like this, where we uncover the economic events that shaped our world while most people weren't paying attention, fascinate you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel because we're just getting started with these financial educational mysteries.